Okay, so in this video, we're going to take a look at graph transformations, in particular vertical and horizontal shifts. So we're going to have some function f of x, right, whose actual equation at this stage here in this section, don't really care, I'm not really going to focus on that. Instead, what I'm going to focus on is, given this function f of x, I'm going to create new functions. And the first way I'm going to create new functions is by taking the graph f of x, whatever those outputs are, and then adding some constant to it, k, right? And taking a look at what effect that has on the graph, right? So I'm going to switch over here to Desmos. So again, here I have an equation of a function f of x, and I'm going to look at, okay, let me create a new function, which I will call g of x. G of x, right, and that'll equal to my function f of x plus some constant k. Excuse me. So I'll add a slider here to k. All right. Here, k goes from -5, let's say, to 5, and step 1. Okay, so right now the k is set at 0, so g of x is essentially equal to f of x. And now let's take a look at what happens as I vary my k in the positive side, right? So now k is 1. Now k is 2. Let me zoom out a little here. K is 3, 4, 5. And we get the idea, right? Notice that the general shape of the graph is not changed, right? The shape of the graph remains the same. There's no change in the actual shape. What happens is we take all of that f of x, and then it gets shifted to whatever value that k is, right? If it's positive, it gets shifted in the upward direction, right? The whole graph. Every point on there gets shifted up 1 unit, right? Which is why the shape is not changed. Right now, as k is negative, we see here the movement of the graph, right? Now it goes in the negative direction. It gets shifted down, right? For k being a negative value. Okay, so that's what we get when we vary, when the k is outside of that function, right? Now I'm going to do something, the next type of translation here. So here, let's so something like this. This corresponds to a vertical shift. Vertical shift. All right. So now I'm gonna change it up a bit. So I'm gonna take a look at my function, but in this case, what I'll do is I'm gonna take a look at something like this, right? X minus k. All right, a vertical shift in here of k units. Right, where here if k is positive, we're talking about an upward shift. K is negative, we're talking about a downward shift. Okay, so now let's take a look at our next type of shift here, right? Where I'll still have this value k, but instead now what I'll do is, going back here, let's say minus k. Okay, and now let's take a look again as I vary my value of k. Okay, so notice here, and maybe let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so here we go. Notice here that the shape of the graph does not change, right? When k is positive, right, we get a movement to the right. Right, here's 0, so same graph. When k is negative, we get a movement to the left. Okay, now here again, it's x minus k, so when it's negative, right, it'll be like x plus 3, and that'll correspond to a movement in the left direction. Okay, and when x is positive, when k is positive, excuse me, we have like x minus 3, So when it's -3, that corresponds to a movement in the right direction. Right, but along the horizontal, right? Notice here that this is much different than the previous one, right? Where we went up and down. Here, we're moving all values along the horizontal, right? And the reason for that, as we can see here, kind of switching over here, when the k is outside the f of x, I essentially evaluate the x, and then I add a value, or subtract if it's negative, right? In whatever direction, right? Which is why it drops along the horizontal, along the vertical, excuse me. So for something like this, we'll get a horizontal shift. Horizontal shift of k units. Okay. Or whatever this k is, right? And again, be careful with this minus when we have something like this, f of x minus 3. That's 3 units to the right. And when it looks something like, let's say, f of x plus 2, that would be 2 units to the left. Okay, but those are the two types of, in this case, shifts when we look at vertical or horizontal.